Previously on the Beam Chronicles.
Maria Caraway.
A desperate psychopath or serving a penance?
Penance. Big one.
Do you know the story about why she got sent to evils?
Yes, Dr. K-Bust.
What's he like? I heard he's crazy smart.
He's crazy smart and smart crazy, you know? Like, it's crazy how smart he is, but then also he's so smart it makes him seem crazy.
Bring Tyler Foon back to HQ, and for the time being, he will be contained.
Howie, I really don't think this is such a good idea.
It is decided, Murph.
This bloke offered me a drink. He didn't realize just how thirsty I was.
Vasquez. Hey, I was right. He was an idiot.
Why would he want to bust Tyler loose? And where were the Dungeoneers in all this? And what the heck do we do with Cidney? We can't just leave him in there.
It is my sincerest wish to join you. Allow my submissiveness and my dispatching of the Blue One to be evidence of my sincerity.
These are the Beam Chronicles, with your host, MJ Dooney. Book 1, Initiation, Chapter 13, Charlie Shayde.
Dale was the head of the Dungeoneers, and he was a shivery little bitch. The guy made JT when we first found him look like Mr. Universe, and JT at his current build looked like Cidney. The fact that this nervous little worm was the whole department's representative was pretty telling of a Dungeoneer's general character. To be fair, Murphy was giving him a royal tongue lashing. I mean, I'd seen Murphy mad, but never like he was when Dale explained that Dungeoneers had made a habit of accepting bribes from equalizers to look the other way while they did stuff in the dungeons.
Look, we're not equalizers. We don't make equalizer money, so when a big dude like Vasquez comes into our little shelter and offers us $5,000 to shut down the cameras for a while, I mean, how are we supposed to know he'd get killed?
Murphy made a noise that was somewhere between squawking like a chicken and roaring like a dinosaur, but Howie held up a hand to silence him.
Did he mention to you why? Did Vasquez explain why he wanted privacy with Foon?
I don't know. Not really, sir. Like I said, they come down here all the time, usually to just knock the anomalies around a bit, the ones they caught. What am I supposed to do, say no to an equalizer?
You're goddamn right, you sniveling little moron!
Jackson, broken ribs and all, was physically restraining Murphy at this point, and I was holding a hand over my mouth to hide my snickering. Off to the side, Sid was sitting cross-legged in his block, tipping his head over his shoulder, curious about the commotion he could see but could not hear.
Vasquez is dead because of you. You understand? You killed him, you bastard! You killed one of my first equalizers!
Murphy Vasquez is dead because of no one but himself.
Howie sneered contemptuously.
It was his own foolish insistence that he gain an audience with a known killer. As your friend, I am sorry for the loss. I'm sure you and Vasquez had established quite a bond over 10 years, but as your superior, I request you do not berate Dale, incompetent as he may be, for Vasquez getting his comeuppance.
You son of a...
Jackson took an elbow to his tender, injured ribs and groaned softly. Murphy didn't notice, or he probably would have relaxed a little bit.
So you say that Vasquez deserved it? Getting sucked dry like a freaking prune, that was some sort of fair punishment to you? After all his years of service? After everything he's done for your damn cause?
Murphy, please try to restrain yourself. Jackson is, after all, injured.
At this point, he finally realized Jackson's uncomfortable expression and eased off on the raging. Howie continued.
It is sad, yes. Vasquez was a good equalizer, and I grieve his death. The fact remains this was completely avoidable had he left well enough alone and allowed Tyler Foon to rot.
Don't you think this whole ordeal proves he should have been rotting a bit more literally, as in under the ground? Maybe that was his point coming down here in the first place. Let him out to demonstrate how much of a hazard he is.
That would be utterly asinine.
Look, I'll tell it to you straight, Howie.
Murphy tried softening his tone, but the vein on his temple was still visibly pulsing.
There's been some grumblings around my department over how things have been going lately. How we've been blurring the lines and making exceptions.
The lines are as firm as ever before, Murphy. The exceptions are the same as when we began.
But Howie, try to see it from their perspective. They joined Beam, some of them, guys like Vasquez, a decade ago, on the curtails of Tanaka, expecting to be keeping the world safe from dangerous people. And we done it. It's been brutal, but at least there was structure and rules. Now, we got anomalies in the ranks, which, don't get me wrong, I love these two kids. It took some warming up to it, but most of the equalizers love these two as well. I'm just saying, you gotta cut them a little slack. Maybe show them you empathize a bit. It's tough adjustments. Some people are more liable to make them than others. Vasquez couldn't. There are more like him. Even if they do accept Charlie and Jackson, how do you expect them to accept a rat bastard like Foon gets to live?
Tell them it was forecasted. Tell them I foresaw it the way I foresaw Tanaka years ago, when nobody listened to me. Tell them my plans are what keep us structured. Tell them the illusion of laxer standards is only a matter of transitioning into an era of more potent threats.
That's not gonna be enough to convince them.
Then I don't care, Murphy. If they are not convinced, let them act unconvinced, but make sure they realize if Vasquez's efforts were truly to prove the awfulness of Tyler, they instead succeeded in proving the utility of Charlie and Jackson. Make sure they realize their fallen comrades' attempt to show the danger of keeping Foon in our dungeon only proved that we are capable of doing it. Even with the assistance of bribable idiots and suicidal idealists who set out to let him escape, Tyler Foon is still in his block.
But we got lucky today, Howie. Jackson was conveniently down here. Charlie just happened to be looking for him and sixed him out. You didn't know Big Purple would play on our side like that. It was all an accident that Foon isn't sprinting to the ocean and taking over the world right now. You can't say we proved that we can hold Tyler when the only reason we did it was a fortunate coincidence.
Never assume to know what I know. Never assume that you may say what I can't say. There are no accidents, no happenstance. The facts are simple. Vasquez aimed to discredit my authority. Not only did he fail, but he died. He defied me and then he died. That is not coincidence. That is consequence.
Murphy backed away slowly.
Easy, Howie. Don't shoot the messenger here. I'm just trying to illustrate it's a tough pill to swallow. I'm just trying to give you perspective on where Vasquez was coming from. Look, I ain't dissenting, but there's a little dissension. That's all, bud.
Howie, probably suddenly remembering Jackson and I were standing in the hallway with him and realizing this conversation was kind of not intended for us to hear, regained his composure quickly.
I know, Murphy, I know. It is a trying day for both of us. All of Beam, really. In 12 years, we've never lost an equalizer. And today, that streak was snapped over a matter of principle. And a Squad 2 veteran, no less. I apologize for my testiness and my indelicacy. I suppose I'm just mad that had he listened to me in the first place, this entire ordeal could have been avoided.
He sighed and pinched his forehead, closing his eyes and massaging.
On the matter of Cidney Kovorsky, I admit I'm intrigued. In the past, with Jackson and Charlie, I've relied on forecasts to dictate the future of Ava's membership, and yet I am reticent to accept that as the only situation in which I can do so. Surely an event occurring twice does not make it a rule-defining precedent. However, I would only consider him given two things. First, we must determine the extent of his ability. He must be evaluated, and properly, by a real evaluator, just to ensure that he is useful to our cause. Second, and perhaps most important, we need a method of containment, as all Ava equalizers have, on the off chance he loses control or changes his mind about where his loyalties lie. Upon clearing those two hurdles, I would consider him for a position.
Wow. I accidentally let slip from my mouth, but just loud enough that only JT heard it. He smirked, shot a gust from his nose, shrugged meekly. I was over here mentally steeling myself up for the moment when I had to kill Cidney, trying to put my mental concept of him back into the figurative glass jar in my brain, return to thinking about him how I'd been thinking about him since he got here. I had him good for dead. Now there was a chance he'd be joining me and JT in the field. Howard Prophet was a lot of things, but he certainly was an impossible man to predict. Even just trying to understand his motives would often lead you in circles. I think he liked it that way, which is why I tried not to think about it and give him the satisfaction, but if I had to guess why he gave Cid a chance, I'd say it was probably a combination of factors. Maybe he was trying to placate JT, give him a trophy to hang his hat on so he'd stop whining so much. Or, in the same vein, maybe he was aiming to prove JT wrong, setting up Cid to fall into a situation where Jackson had to equalize them. Maybe it was a message to the rebellious equalizers Murphy was talking about, telling them just how much of his ass they were permitted to kiss by allowing yet another Anam to live, basically because he wanted to. Hell, maybe he'd forecasted it after all and just didn't want to tell us after I'd manipulated his superstition in the Foon case. Probably some other pieces I didn't even have a clue about. In all likelihood, we'd never really find out Howie's motivations for half of the shit he did.
Jackson, fetch Maria Caraway for me, please.
Why Maria?
Well, she is an official evaluator, for one. I mostly trust her judgment, secondly. And third, her experience as an equalizer will suit her well should the evaluation go awry.
Howie, don't you think she's a little too close to this?
Murphy cut in on JT's behalf.
How so?
Well, this guy, Cidney, he's Kevorski's chosen son. Kevorski. That's her case, you know?
Bah.
He waved off the concern.
I hardly see the relevance. I myself had completely forgotten. I'm sure someone as professional as Maria will put something that far in the past behind her for our purposes. Besides, if she hasn't already, it'll be a good opportunity for her to face down her demons. Maybe we'll learn something about her along the way,
Oh, hey. Put that on the list of potential motivations. Opportunity to torture his old favorite. That one sounded the most like Howie. JT wisely turned his appeal to Murphy.
Do I really have to be the one that asks for Murph? I mean, equalizer beats evaluator, but I'm not sure she's gonna be too thrilled about it if her boyfriend starts pulling rank on her.
I'll save you from the doghouse, kid. I'll be right back. I gotta go back up top to Pager. We doing it down here then?
Yes. Why risk moving him?
Aw, Howie. Oh, we can't do it in a dungeon lockup. They're soundproof. None of us will be able to hear it.
Don't fret, Charlie.
He smirked, glancing down at Dale, who had just as well assumed he was invisible through all of this.
I think I've found an adequate punishment for our head dungeoneer.
Howie the disciplinarian was a terror, and I'd experienced it firsthand numerous times. Call me a hypocrite, this was hilarious. On one side of the glass stood Murphy, Howie, and I, with Jackson a little farther down holding to press the button on the intercom. On the other, Maria and Cid sat peacefully at a folding table, while Dale the Dungeoneer manned the speaker. And puny, worm-like Dale, at the very notion of being in the same room as a behemoth like Cidney, was sweating and shaking and practically crying, huddled in the corner with his eyes closed, petrified. I could tell the cruelty made JT and Caraway a little uncomfortable, but not enough to say anything when Murphy and I were blatantly enjoying it so much. Cidney, on the other hand, had not yet developed that wall between thoughts and speech.
Why is this man so moist?
He asked, furrowing his brow as he watched Dale tremble. Maria just smiled.
He's sweating, Cidney.
I do know what sweating is. I was more inquiring on the reason for his sweating. It is not overly warm in here.
I think you just make him a little nervous.
Well, it is mutual. He makes me nervous as well. Cannot he and Jackson Teak alternate positions? That would be better for both of us. For me, because this moist man makes me uncomfortable, and for you, because my new friend Jackson is the object of your most lusty infatuations.
Murphy and I nearly fell over, poorly stifling laughter. Even Howie cracked a weak smile. JT and Caraway avoided eye contact in embarrassment.
I don't have the foggiest idea what you mean.
Cid looked puzzled.
But I saw you eating his tongue many times down here. I learned this to be a semi-cannibalistic mating ritual.
Mercifully, before Murph and I died, Maria dodged the issue.
Jackson and Dale can't switch. Dale is in here because he's being punished, Cid.
Ah, he is a new prisoner. Do I now have a cellmate?
He leaned around Maria and cocked an eyebrow at Dale.
I do not want this one.
No, he's not living here. He's just in here because he's scared of you. That's the punishment.
Cidney smiled, baring his shark teeth.
He is scared of me. Ha! Should I perhaps go over to him and say hello? Then he will be more scared. It will be a better punishment. Oh, I could punch him in the head.
No, Cidney, that's all right. Leave him alone. He's terrified enough as it is.
It is not fair that you know my name and I do not know yours. What are you called?
I'm Maria Caraway. Or just Maria. Or I guess just Caraway works too.
This is another name I have waited a very long time to learn. I remember you from that day when this bureau abducted my father and slaughtered my siblings. I remember what you did. You were very brave.
Caraway looked up frantically, first to Jackson, who didn't really have the context to know why she was panicked, then to me. Both of us nodded in reassurance. Howie quietly stroked his goatee.
Cid, let's not talk about that day, okay? It's kind of a sore subject.
I did not intend to cause you soreness, Maria. I am sorry for my transgression.
It's okay, Cid.
He grinned, probably because she called him Cid, and she pressed on.
So, look, what we're trying to do here is establish some basic information about you. What you can do, to what extent, how long, that sort of thing. Usually we do it by anonymous observation, but this is kind of a special case. We can't really anonymously observe you to evaluate you if you just live in this little box and always know we're here. So instead, I'm just going to ask you some general questions about yourself and what you can do, and you should try to answer as honestly as you can, okay?
Yes.
Good. How old are you?
I am 17 years and approximately 7 months old.
She wrote it down. Nobody batted an eye. To an outside observer, it was a blatant lie. Cidney looked closer to 50 than he did 17. Between his stature, his voice, his facial features, hell, even his general demeanor, he was about as far from the average American teenager as you could get. The whole purple thing didn't help draw him closer. But the seasoned veterans of Beam, even the greener among us, like JT, had enough experience with people like Cidney to accept that he was 17 at his word. Once you've witnessed firsthand a 15-year-old little girl going subnuclear and almost annihilating a department store, or an 8-year-old boy sneezing down his elementary school, you tend to stop discriminating anomalistic activity by age. Besides, Cidney was barely human, if he was human at all. 17-year-old bears look pretty terrifying, right? Maybe not. Maybe they're dead.
How tall are you?
I am 7 feet tall.
Oh, hey, me too.
Good one.
He smiled back.
And weight?
976 pounds.
Again, seemed off, but it was far from the most preposterous weight we'd ever recorded, and I could six an immense sort of density to his body. Caraway began writing it down. Cidney leaned forward eagerly.
You too.
Watch it, buddy.
Ha, 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 ha.
He laughed that weird, chunky laugh he did, like he read about it in a book one time.
I am only joking, Maria. Surely a skinny girl like you could not weigh more than 500 pounds.
She smiled wryly and shook her head.
What else can you tell me about yourself, Cid?
I am my father's greatest creation. None of his children before or since can live up to his accomplishments with me. I am what Dr. Kowarski considers the perfect specimen of life.
Can you give some examples of what that involves?
Extreme strength, for example, is one of my attributes. I am quite strong.
Sure. You look it. How strong are you, would you say? What's the heaviest thing you've ever deadlifted, just so I got a number?
It is difficult to say. I do not usually know the weight of something before I lift it. I would wager it is on the order of tens of tons. Specifically, I am not sure.
Tens of tons?
Yes, on that order, probably closer to hundreds. Like I have said, this is not something I have tested.
Baloney.
No, thank you.
Huh?
I do not wish to have your baloney.
No, it's a figure of speech. It means I don't believe you.
You do not believe that I am as strong as I say?
No way.
Why not?
You're big. You aren't that big. The strongest man in the world can only lift like half a ton, maybe, Cid. You can't possibly be 100 times stronger. You don't have the muscle mass.
I am confused. If I am 100 times stronger than the strongest man in the world, am I not the strongest man in the world?
Maria blinked at him a few times.
Shit. Can't really argue with that logic. Although, I guess I'd ask if you count as a man. Like, are you human?
That is debatable. I did used to be completely human at one time.
Really? When was that? Do you remember it being human?
I do not remember it because I was a zygote.
Oh, yeah, okay. I don't remember when I was a single cell either.
My father performed genetic modifications on a fertilized human egg, amplifying it with new biological structures of his invention down to a molecular level. So my muscles and your strong friend's muscles are simply not the same. That is why I do not look 100 times bigger than him, but I am 100 times stronger. What is his name, by the way? Your second strongest man friend.
Well, I don't know him personally, Cidney. I was just sort of estimating.
Ah, that is a disappointment. I wanted to arm wrestle him to prove to you that I am not baloney.
You want to arm wrestle me?
Fine.
He almost immediately slammed his elbow onto the table, which made Deal yelp, Maria jump, and me snort.
But I will win easily. You are absolutely minuscule.
Maria slowly turned to look at Howie, I guess seeking his approval to engage. Howie nodded emphatically.
By all means, I'm curious to see it.
She bravely grabbed the enormous purple hand and started yanking at it with all her might. Cidney's assessment of her was brutal but accurate. Caraway was probably the smallest person the situation had to offer, easily the worst arm wrestler, but even so, watching her push both of her hands against his palm as he boredly sat there, utterly motionless, was moderately impressive.
Charlie, Jackson, want to help out?
She grunted, now standing up, yanking on his unwavering hand with all of her body weight. I reluctantly grouped into the cell to do the same, but the two of us together, hanging off of separate fingers, still couldn't get him to twitch. Even with JT's added telekinetic push, which was certainly much more significant than either of us, we couldn't get Cidney to break a sweat. "Jackson, are you even pushing?" I snapped, not particularly fond of looking so weak and eager to pass the blame on to anyone else.
Yes?
He growled through gritted teeth. Then an idea hit me. Okay, keep pushing, one sec. And I grouped towards Cidney's chair, regrouping in a crouch with my hands wrapped around two of the legs, and ungrouped those legs while Jackson continued to push. Cidney almost immediately lost his balance, and I ungrouped just in time to avoid him crushing me. I regrouped to hear the colossal thud he made when he hit the ground. For a minute, he sat down there, yellow snake-slit eyes wide and mouth agape. Then he burst into laughter.
Oh, Charlie, you have bested me. It seems you were the strongest man in the world after all.
I'm sorry, Cidney. I really hate losing. Sometimes it gets the better of me.
Nonsense. You are the first person to ever beat me in arm wrestling.
Well, I don't know if this counts as an arm wrestle.
It does.
He rose to his feet, dusting off his lap.
You have used the most powerful arms of them all, the arms of the mind.
I grouped back out of the cell, regrouping between Murphy and Prophet.
Seems his personality is a good fit. That's good to see. It's something I always worry about when adding to Ava's roster.
I wanted to deride him, to sneer something dismissive about him tiptoeing around my personality like I was some kind of diva, or worse, like he gave a shit. But I caught a glimpse of Cidney, still beaming at his big defeat, and he shot me an enthusiastic thumbs up, which might have been the first one of those he ever did, given the way he rotated his entire arm down and extended it straight in front of him. It coaxed a smile out of me, in spite of all of my antagonistic whims toward Prophet. "Yeah," I eventually said. "I like him." I try not to read too much into his satisfied smirk, because I thought if I did, it would piss me off all over again.
Oh, I do not seem to have a chair.
Cidney said as the thought struck him.
Charlie broke mine.
Oh, that's fine, dude. I brought extras.
She pointed to a stack of metal chairs leaning against the wall of the lockup.
I sort of anticipated we wouldn't get through this endeavor without breaking at least one of them.
Perfect.
He snatched a chair, held it in front of his chest between two hands, then pressed them together, crumpling the steel frame into a tiny ball as if it were tissue paper.
Further demonstration of my strength. Do you believe I am as strong as I say now?
Okay, yes, you are strong. I admit it. But you said your dad reworked things on a molecular level. How did he just invent new biochemistry to come up with something better than all the animals in the world use? That's crazy stuff.
Cidney shrugged, but again, it seemed like the first time he'd ever done it. He hoisted his shoulders, extended either of his palms straight out, absolutely flat up to the ceiling, like he was mimicking the emoji or something. Again, he tickled me just enough to get me to chuckle, and I ignored Murphy, glancing at me with a wry smirk.
Scientifically, I do not understand anything he did.
Cidney admitted, holding his textbook perfect shrug for a second or two longer, then dropping out of it.
He told me my DNA would be unrecognizable when compared to any other living thing on Earth, that the proteins in my body would contain amino acids unseen elsewhere.
Feels like that would probably make you look a little weirder, right? Like changing all the building blocks, why'd you turn out so human?
My father was a human, and so I look like one. He used human structure as a framework. Much of me is very similar to you because in areas where he did not wish to develop a more efficient or potent system, he left it alone. If it is not broke, do not fix it. For example, I have a brain, I have lungs, I even have a heart. I eat as you eat, I sleep as you sleep. I find joy in many of the same things that bring you joy. I believe there is also a social factor involved. His intention was to keep me as close to human as possible, so I could make friends without spurring the exact response I am currently spurring in the moist one over in the corner. Dale, right? Hello, Dale.
He whimpered and sunk a bit lower. Cidney just frowned.
All right, well, what other parts of us regular humans did Dr. K think were so broken other than our muscles?
My skeleton is different. In order to ensure that my enhanced muscular strength did not snap my brittle bones, they are much more durable and have a higher tensile strength. My skin as well was modified to be perfectly flexible but nigh impregnable. I suppose they are comparable to such carbon-based synthesized objects as nanotubes or Kevlar, which have similar such properties to a lesser extent.
Yeah, Sid, but that stuff is made by machines with lasers and high pressure and energy. You're trying to tell me you just make it with your body?
A body is a machine. We have worms that generate silk and bees that generate honey.
Well, silk and honey are a heck of a long jump from impenetrable skin and unbreakable bones.
And yet if you handed a jar of honey and my femur to a hungry chimpanzee, by which object would he be more baffled and excited? You assume biology is less miraculous when it is commonplace, but from my perspective, the miracle of my bones pales in comparison to things like emotion and consciousness, even love. At the end of the day, Maria, these are biological constructions as well. Are they so plausible when an unbreakable arm gives you pause?
That's an incredibly cute point, Cidney.
Yes, thank you. I do cute things often. Even my father, who was not an affectionate sort, would often comment on how adorable I was.
He wasn't wrong. You're a real cutie.
Oh, I must be upfront. I am not interested in you sexually, Maria.
No, Cidney, I wasn't.
Your red hair is lovely, and you are very pretty, but you are far too tiny for me.
Okay, I got it. I understand.
Plus, I do not want to betray the trust of my new friend Jackson Teague, who seems quite taken with you.
JT took the opportunity to jump into the conversation, probably in part to remind Cidney he could hear everything he was saying, but also to keep Murphy and I from laughing at him.
Hey, Sid.
Cidney looked up, startled at first, but then incredibly pleased.
Ah, Jackson Teague. I'd forgotten my new friends were still here. Hello there, Jackson.
Hi, Sid. Tell her
Jackson,
about the...
I regret to inform you that Maria seems to be in love with me. I did let her down easy.
Sorry, honey.
I am partially to blame. I should not have arm wrestled with her.
Okay, Sid, but...
Okay, I really like him, I muttered to Murphy under my breath as the three of them attempted to resolve the love triangle between them that Cidney had just completely fabricated.
That's two potential partners in a row, Shayde. What's going on with you lately?
I'm getting soft.
You kinda are.
Jackson finally got the point out he was aiming for in the first place.
Tell her about the purple acid stuff that you used on the bed when I was hitting you with it and it dissolved.
Ah, thank you, Jackson. I had almost forgotten my signature feature, though I should inform you, it is not acid.
He turned back to Maria zealously.
My father developed a highly reactive compound capable of digesting and corroding any physical substance. He called it the Kowarski phage complex. What makes this complex so incredibly unique is that without the presence of diatomic nitrogen, it is utterly inert. But with sufficient diatomic nitrogen, the Kowarski phage complex becomes activated and devours everything it touches until the instability of this activated state causes it to break apart. Within my body, I generate the Kowarski phage complex, the same way you would generate an enzyme or a cell. It is contained within a separate organ system similar to a bloodstream or a lymphatic system. However, there are ports on my wrists that tap into the system. This is the reason for the brass shackles permanently adorning my forearms. When I rotate them, like so, The Kovorsky phage complex is extracted from the port and into the chambers of these devices. It is still unexposed to nitrogen, so it remains in the inert state, unreactive. But when I flex my fist, the devices fire stored KPC into the air, where it is activated and dissolves whatever substance on which it lands.
KPC, nice. We love acronyms.
It is more commonly pronounced KPAC.
Ooh, that's even better.
Would you like a demonstration?
Is it dangerous?
It is a little dangerous, but as I have mentioned, KPAC is highly unstable in its activated form and will naturally dismantle itself harmlessly after a few seconds. All that will happen is whatever I fire it at will break down and dissolve. I could do the bed over there, perhaps.
Maria glanced to Howie, who nodded in approval. He had a stern, concerned look on his face, like this whole ordeal was proving to be a waste of effort. For the first time, I thought about how all of the info Sid had been giving us proved he would be a useful addition to Ava, but nothing so far showed any indication that he'd be containable. This K-Pack business, if it worked as advertised, was probably the last nail in the coffin for poor Cidney, and he was so damn excited to show it off. He lifted his arm over his shoulder and clenched his fist without looking. As advertised, a weird, goopy, purplish liquid flew out of the device on his wrist and landed onto the bed, devouring it with a hissing smoke for about 15 seconds, then ceasing. Maria was so excited by it, she literally started clapping, but Murphy and I shot each other a knowing look. The kid's fate was practically sealed.
I've seen enough.
Howie said after the K-Pack demonstration was complete.
Maria, Dale, come back into the hallway. Thank you for your cooperation, Cidney. We have much to discuss.
Did we, though? Once Dale had scattered down the hallway to his dungeoneer post, sniveling and pissing himself all the way, Howie convened the five of us to talk about the implications of everything we'd just seen and heard. It was really at this point only a matter of formality. JT and Caraway stood idly by, holding hands, frowning, and Maria looked like she might cry. Even Murphy seemed distraught about the shit that was about to go down. As for me, it was troublesome. Really troublesome. Usually this close to a proper equalization, I was blank, but Cidney was giving me more pause mentally than any anomaly had given me in a very long time. See, I'd stopped counting how many people I'd killed well before this point. I remembered a few of them in particular, but for the most part, they blurred together. Hell, I wanted them to blur together. I wanted it to be fuzzy and imprecise. Thinking about it too much, trying to single out individual kills, individual faces, that was how you drove yourself crazy. If I stayed uncommitted, vacant, and emotionless, each equalization I performed would be easier than the previous one. Allowing that numbness was the sole salvation I could construct for my own sanity, and I don't know specifically who it was that I'd equalized immediately before that day. Like I said, I didn't want to single them out like that, but I knew whoever the hell the poor son of a bitch was, whatever the fuck he could do, I did him in with 1% of the qualms I had over doing Sid. This was the first one in a long time that was harder than the last. No matter what I thought about, I couldn't clear my mind enough. I couldn't approach the act of killing him from an angle that would allow me to stuff it in the murder archive and forget about it. How could I forget his name? How could I forget his face? I was the master of suppression. And yet here I was, dilemmas of a moral nature overtaking my waking brain. I knew whose fault this was. I knew the asshole whose relentless insistence had undone 2 years' worth of self-conditioning. I knew who made me incapable of keeping my head down, plunging forward. I knew who was to blame.
Jackson.
Howie finally spoke after intensely staged deliberations.
I think it's clear that we have no method of containment. There is no other choice, given our present protocols. Could you please handle the situation?
No, not Jackson, I'll do it, I insisted coldly.
Thank you for volunteering, Charlie, but I think it would be a nice opportunity for him
I
to—
said I'd do it, Prophet. I snapped, and he winced at the sound of his last name. Not Jackson. He gave me an elongated look, but it wasn't particularly angry or annoyed or anything. Like he was just reading my face, like he was scanning for something.
I do appreciate that you've taken a shining to him. It does my heart good to see you finally make a true human friend, but eventually he is going to have to equalize someone.
Not if I can help it. He shot me a smug, befuddled smirk, stroking his beard, and Jackson reached out and touched my arm, maybe muttered my name under his breath. I shrugged him off, not breaking eye contact with Prophet. Howie sighed, relented in our staring contest as he glanced at his shoes, then back to me.
Look, Charlie, I know we have a somewhat rocky history.
I sneered at the understatement of the century.
But I was earnestly hoping that you and I could...
I never got to hear the end of that sentence because then Phil came around the corner and derailed the whole ordeal.
Wait!
He shouted as he barreled toward us, arms full of documents fluttering away from him with every step. He reached us finally in a panting huff, dropping the papers he had still under his arm on the floor and doubling over in exhaustion. JT scooped up all the loose ones he dropped along the way telekinetically and brought them over to him as he tried to regain his breath.
Thanks, Jackson.
Phil, what in the hell are you doing down here?
Murphy asked, intensely relieved at the random interruption he'd provided. Phil exhaled heavily one last time.
You know how news travels super fast around here? Well, so basically first I heard that Vasquez died trying to let Foon out, then I heard that Cidney got out, so I started collecting all these pages because I wanted to have everything before I came down here to tell you guys, but then I found out you already called an evaluator in on it, and I knew you were going to equalize them, so I just grabbed all of it, and I came down here as fast as I could, and...
Phil, you called him Cidney. Not Big Purple, but Cidney. News does not travel that quickly. How did you know his actual name? I know you are both creations of Dr. Kovorsky, but you promised me you did not know anything about him when we caught him.
Well, I didn't when you caught him, because I didn't grow up in the lab like Cidney did. Otherwise, all of the other Kovorsky creations would have, killed me.
Then I repeat my question. How did you know his name was Cidney?
Phil groaned and rubbed his eyes with the palms of his hands.
Okay, here's the deal. I'm gonna tell you something, and at first you're not gonna understand why I'm telling you. Then you're still not gonna understand, but you'll be pissed at me. Then you will understand, and hopefully you'll stop being pissed at me, okay?
Oh, I eagerly anticipate the part where I stop being upset, Phil. You know how I feel about secrets.
Alright, well, here it goes. Kovorsky is nuts, but he's brilliant. And his ideas were unethical and dangerous, but again, brilliant. So I thought maybe, right after we busted him, I could go through his notes and piece together something actually useful. Look, everybody was so somber and depressed after that bust, and a lot of people were mad at me, because he was my dad. I had something to do with whatever the hell happened, so I figured, read his stuff, dig up a little positive outcome, maybe everyone will stop being so upset about it. This is still the part where you don't have any idea why I'm telling you this.
I realized.
Anyway, so I started looking through his notes, but I couldn't read them.
He held up a few pages at random.
I assumed they were in Polish because, he's Polish, but I got a friend to translate and he said they were not in Polish at all. And I started sending them around to language experts all over the world for some indication of what it could be, and nothing. Nobody could translate. Nobody knew what the hell he was doing. It's gibberish. Scribbles and gibberish, and I had nothing to work with, so I paid Dale $500 to let me take some samples out of Sid.
Hey, anybody else think we should fucking fire Dale? I asked rhetorically.
Anyway, I tried to collect them through the capsule, but I couldn't get in, so I just, opened it up. And this is the part where you're pissed at me.
Again, I realized.
And he was a cool guy, a real gentle giant sort of deal. I'm sure by now you've all discovered it. He told me about his abilities, all the stuff I'm sure he just told you, and all the while I was thinking, bullshit, impossible bullshit. This guy is confused, this guy's nuts. Dr. K has him all wrapped up in lies, took my samples, put Cidney into his pod, went back to my lab. It's insane, you guys. Cidney told me Kovorsky constructed more reactive amino acid side chains, yeah, try explosive. Stuff that can't even exist in the world without reacting with air or anything it touches. And Kovorsky just tossed them onto the end of a carbon chain and kept them stable. How? I have no idea, because just in the process of trying to look at the stuff I took from Sid, it would explode all over the place. The process of looking at it made it too unstable to keep, and it's just floating around in his body, completely innocent and safe and stable for 17 years and counting.
I glanced up at him, this walking, breathing tank apparently full of eruptive substances, sitting cross-legged on the floor, digging in his right nostril, about a knuckle and a half deep. Was that deep enough to hit the stuff that was so violent and volatile? He caught me watching him pick his nose, anxiously started pretending he was just scratching the side of it.
And the K-Pack? I don't even get what it's doing. Like, I don't even know physically what the hell it is. I'm not sure. Parts of it might not even be matter.
So, like, antimatter?
Phil sputtered his lips, shrugging exasperatedly.
Maybe not even that, but the reason I tell you all of this, Kevorkiy isn't just some really smart, ahead of his time bioengineer like we thought, guys. It's not that he's just better than me, and if I think about it for long enough, I'll figure out what he's doing. This isn't Tesla versus Edison. This isn't even Tesla versus, like, medieval servant boy who empties the chamber pots. This is like Tesla and a goldfish. But, and this is the part that matters, I did figure one thing out. See, if Kevorkiy's that smart, he wouldn't just make an uncontrollable, super powerful monster baby boy without some way of keeping him from rebelling and melting the world. And if Cidney was as strong as he claimed to be, why couldn't he bust out of that K-pod he was in all this time? Then I cracked it. I confirmed it by my analysis of Cidney.
Phil paused his frantic ramblings to start rifling through the pages he brought with him, obviously hunting for a very specific one, but doing so with limited urgency or efficiency.
Phil, stop. Here.
Jackson grumbled, splaying them all out in the air around Phil so he could just scan through them as they orbited his head. So impressive, I swooned, pinching his little cheek. No hands or nothing.
Shut up.
He blushed just red enough that I left him alone.
This one.
Phil snatched some sort of medical imaging scan of Cidney out of the air, jabbed his finger into a dark zone right at the base of Cidney's ribcage.
That organ. We don't have that. So I investigated it. Turns out, Cidney gets all of his energy from food, just like we do, and this little organ here is...
He faded out when he noticed me raising my hand.
Yeah, this isn't school. You can just talk.
What's he eat? I asked, dropping my hand back down.
Chicken nuggets.
Seriously?
Yes. Pretty much exclusively. He's incredibly picky. But those chicken nuggets go from his stomach to this new organ. I call it his nuclear gizzard. And along with the nuggets comes a little nitrogen from his lungs, and most importantly, K-Pack. All that held together in the nuclear gizzard, the activated K-Pack keeps devouring and devouring, converting into pure energy. He eats that chicken nugget, and it turns into an atomic bomb.
Phil, my patience is wearing to its limit. When is the part where this story makes me not upset with you?
This is it. Don't you see it? It's nitrogen. The K-Pack is the locomotive pushing the whole Cidney train. The strength, all of it is driven by the energy generated by K-Pack. And the fuel that drives that locomotive is nitrogen. That's why he couldn't break out of the pod ever. It was depriving him of nitrogen. Without nitrogen, without air, no activated KPC. No activated KPC, he's just like you and me, only purple and sort of ugly.
So we can contain him.
JT excitedly chimed in.
If he goes to Naka, just throw a dome of oxygen over him and he loses his strength. He can't shoot his melty goo. It all goes away.
Precisely. He's useful and containable, Howie. Scientific fact. Punish me if you want for being irresponsible, but you have no good reason not to let Cidney join Beam. I mean, you know, unless you don't want to.
Howie stroked his goatee a few more times as the rest of us stood motionless, holding our breath, praying that maybe his power lust would overcome his murderous dogma. Cidney was useful. Cidney was containable. But Cidney was a variable in fate's grand design, an unforecasted variable. When he finally lifted his gaze, Howie directed it right toward me, staring through me like he was waiting for me to do something. I simply glared back at him as his mouth curled into a fiendish smile. Deliberately and dramatically, Howie made his way over to the control panel and swiped his card, opening the glass to Cidney's cell.
Mr. Kevorkiy, before I make my final decision on your inauguration to my bureau, I would like to know, do you have any questions for me?
I have 4. May I see my father?
Never.
It was as cold and blunt as Howie, the master of both of those concepts, could muster, but Cidney just nodded sadly and proceeded.
If I were to become an agent, would I live here in the dungeon?
No, Cidney. We provide you with housing, as we do all of our equalizers. You do not have to accept it, but it is yours if you'd like.
Thus, my third question, what is your policy on pets?
We have no policy.
We actually got a lobster looking for a good home. We call him Patrick.
Patrick will be my lobster.
All yours.
But listen up, Lenny. There's a human being Satanist shaman in there somewhere, so be careful how hard you pet him.
Why did you call me Lenny?
Cidney, did you have another question?
Howie was a twinge impatient.
What are you called?
Prophet smiled his smarmy greaseball smile.
I am Howard Prophet. Just Howie will do.
It is nice to meet you, Howie. I have no further questions.
In that case, welcome to Beam, Agent Kavorsky.
They shook hands. Howie patted me on the back as he went past and nodded. I nodded back wordlessly, and then he walked off. Just like that.
Well, all right then.
Wow, dude, what did you say?
The celebration began. The over-aggressive hugs, the cheering and whatnot. I hung back and watched, trying to take in a rare moment of something kind of happy happening. And exactly how I wished it would. In spite of my anticipation to the contrary, it had gotten to that point with Howie. When he did something cool, it was cause for celebration. Giving Sid a fair shot, like a legitimate, actual fair shot, was so far outside my expectations for him. It kind of reminded me of the Howie I knew when I first started at Beam. The Howie who I once upon a time thought of as something like a dad. And in a lot of ways, I just wish Dad Howie would stop cropping up. It made things a hell of a lot easier to just pin everything on his wretched, uncompromising jackass of a soul. But I suppose if I had to be reminded of Howie's humanity, it was nice that it came with something as fun and interesting as Cidney. Ava had a new agent. The triumvirate was complete. And from there, for a long time, we ran the whole world.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Beam Chronicles, a fiction podcast written and produced by me, MJ Dooney. I would be extremely pleased and grateful if you could throw me a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're hearing this. If you have someone in your life who might appreciate the story I'm telling, please share the word. Any positive word of mouth is great. I'm so curious about who's listening to this, so if you want to shoot me an email with some constructive criticism or encouragement or just to say hi, beamchronicles@gmail.com. I would be ecstatic to hear some feedback. Also, if you like what you hear or want to get updates, you can follow me on Twitter @beamchronicles or TikTok, same handle. I've also been posting episodes to YouTube if you want to like, follow, subscribe there. I still have no idea what to do with Instagram, but follow me there too, I guess. All music and sound effects were sourced through the Epidemic Sound Library. Special thanks to Sergio Duarte for creating the cover art for this podcast. You can find him on Instagram. Thanks again for listening.